All right, this is Dr. Kirsty. I'm with my colleague and dear friend, Madrona Bourdeau, retired midwife and craniosacral practitioner up here in Taos, New Mexico. And this is kind of inspired. I was going to be teaching a weekend class in Rewilding the Feminine, and I really want to reach out to my colleagues and girlfriends who are some of my inspiration about bringing the feminine back into our daily lives in traditional healing arts. So Rewilding the Feminine with a Y instead of an I, because that's the Scottish Celtic viewpoint on it. And then this is going to be about interviews with women I love and the work they do to serve in the healing arts. So Madrona, thank you. I'm so excited. I get to interview all these dear women that I love for this. So I'm really actually excited. And we're in April 13th, 2020. So most of you are aware that we are, most of us are sheltering in place, so to speak, for the pandemic to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So this is an interesting time to launch a platform like this. But Madrona and I co-taught with Leeville, DC out of Kansas City, mama baby cranial training last year, working with birth stories and really creating a sense of sensitivity and working with women and babies who have had a trauma history or the trauma that can potentially surround birth and the way that birth is done in our culture. And also, I wanted to say, Madrona, I think grief is going to come up with part of this too. I don't want to forget that I would also like us to talk about what happens when a mom loses their child in birth down the road in our conversation today. I think that's one trauma that is often not talked about, and even the loss of miscarriage as well, and the grief that surrounds that. So I don't want to forget to address that. But do you want to say a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now, and like how long you've been in the field, and the fact that you studied with Carol Gray? And
Sure.
Yeah.
So I've been a midwife. I've been tending birth since 1977 after the birth of my daughter, and single mom and all the craziness that kind of went on at that point. Midwifery really grabbed my heart. I always have said that. I felt like Spirit put a hook in my heart chakra and said, come this way, this is your path. And after her birth, I knew that that was what I was supposed to do. I technically retired, and I say technically because I still do a handful of births here and there, but I technically retired at the end of 2015 due mostly to health issues. I miss the work in lots of ways, and I don't miss the on-call schedule. But I miss seeing women unfold and a family develop and watching that whole process and being a part of it. It was a really big key to my identity and the love, really the love of my life. And so when I, let's see, I started doing cranial work in, let's see, I moved here in 2010, so it'd be it was 2008, 2009, around there. So I moved here from Portland, and Carol Gray is a big craniosacral therapist there. She teaches classes, all that stuff. And I would call her, and her and I had done births together. We knew we were good friends. And I would call her to, you know, to work on a baby for who had tongue tie or whatever, something was going on, usually problems with breastfeeding. And finally she got tired of me calling her and said, come to my class. And so I came to her first to her baby class, and then I did the pregnancy postpartum class. They were about 6 or 7 months apart. And I kind of just took it just so that I could work on my own clients and my own babies, you know, and I started doing cranial adjustments right, like we do newborn exam when babies are between an hour and 2 hours old, and I started just right away putting my hands on them and just sort of aligning them. And I actually really feel if babies can get that first cranial adjustment within 24 to 48 hours, it makes a huge difference on how they unwind and how, you know, and just, I don't see as many problems with babies that get it quickly. When I retired from midwifery, I just threw all my energy into that because it still keeps me connected to moms and babies, and keeps my hands in the work. And I also, because of all my years of midwifery, I can really, being a breastfeeding consultant, I can really work with women in postpartum, and ideally I get them on the table when they're pregnant, but that doesn't happen much here, at least. I don't think women really pay as much attention to themselves other than getting the pregnancy related care. It's only in postpartum that they really start to see that it's important when their body hurts and it's been through, you know. So I've been doing that actively. I have a little office in town, but mostly I go to people's homes. And when I can, I get moms on the bed and work on them and try to put them back together a little bit. And when I really can, I try to get them on my table and have them come in and see me. So.
Yeah. I remember when I apprenticed with you guys over, and I attended a birth with you, and I remember you treating the baby right when it basically came out, and you were checking the vitals, and then you moved right into treating the craniosacral. And it was really beautiful to watch that in action in the birth process, and have that happen and not have to have a delay in the treatment. Maybe for those who are listening, that not everybody maybe knows what craniosacral therapy is, and we're both trained in craniosacral therapy. And do you want to give your take on it, or should I talk a little? Or
why don't you talk about it a little bit, and then I'll give my take.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really love about craniosacral therapy is it works with the cranial nerves that come up out of the brain. So it really is one of the only treatments we have that treat the brain, that treat the base of the occiput and the nervous system as it comes out of the spinal cord all the way down to the tip of the tail, the sacrum. So it's one of the few systems of treatment we have that we can calm the nervous system, take it out of a fight or flight sympathetic response and bring it into parasympathetic. So, or vice versa, if you know what you're doing, you can be treating parasympathetic, bringing somebody to sympathetic if that is the case that needs to happen. That's rare in our culture, and especially right now with so much fear happening with the pandemic, we're really in a hyper nervous system and fight or flight response. So having tools and ways to treat is even more important. And I just have to say that I learned the hard way because of my birth process. When I gave birth to my daughter, I ended up developing PTSD that was kind of, you know, it had like that positive feedback loop. It just kind of was stress, but then it got layered more and more and more stress. And then by the time my daughter was about 14 months old, I was having full-blown panic attacks and anxiety, and I had no idea because I didn't have the support. So I think for my own healing, besides doing like pranayama and having breath practices in my the yoga world, craniosacral therapy is like a lifesaver. And also we really need each other to co-regulate. So like with polyvagal theory, Dr. Porges's work, we're really showing how important it is to have the co-regulation, and mama and baby co-regulate each other. So that's like a big piece, right, of bringing the baby up and during a birth and putting it to the chest. They start co-regulating, mama and baby start to co-regulate each other, and we need each other. And when there's some kind of, you know, if somebody's having postpartum depression or there's something else that's going on that prevents that awareness and co-regulation, then I think that helps, that facilitates even more potential sympathetic overload response. That's what.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and babies come out, even babies who have the best birth, babies come out in fight or flight. when they are born, they take their top of their take their feet to the top of the uterus, and when the mom is pushing, the baby pushes against the uterus to push itself down, and so it engages the psoas muscles, which engages the adrenals, which puts them in total fight or flight. And the gift of doing cranial work right away is that you can take them out of that fight or flight response, so they're not, gritting their jaws, they're not flailing so much, and so what we often think of as a normal baby response with their, the way they move their arms, if they feel like their head's being dropped, they bite down. That is also part of the reason why they react as strongly as they do, is because they're in fight or flight. And so I just see babies having less and less of that when they get care really quickly. And I just, so still when I go to births, I still get my hands and do, a 10 or 15 minute session. They don't really need very much at that point, but just, to get them unwound and get them out of fight or flight, because then they're not layering. And really true for babies that are born either very quickly, when they're slammed out into the world, they don't get to do what's called cardinal movements. They don't really get to move in all their movements to come down. Or if they're born by C-section, because they don't get to even go through the birth canal. So they definitely don't get to do cardinal movements. And they go from having all this pressure around them to being brought out to the world really quickly, instead of there being this sort of rocking movement that normally happens in birth. And so when those babies come out, they're totally in fight or flight, eyes shut, closed, jaw jammed, locked down, arms flailing. They're in really, because they're a little bit in shock. And so getting your hands, being able to do cranial work on a baby real quickly like that kind of brings them back into their body, grounds them, unwinds their psoas to some extent, and allows them to feel safe. And so I like that thing about layering. We can peel that top layer right away before it even has a chance to sort of create, continual trauma, with them. So.
Well, and it's like you say, if we can get in the beginning, then that actually prevents that fight or flight response continuing. But I think it's also gets back to the birth story, right? Where mama and baby and the partner and whoever is part of the birth process, there's a story. The baby has a story too. So those cardinal movements you're talking about, which is like a rebirthing, that the baby gets to tell its birth story. And a lot of people, I didn't know this when I gave birth to my daughter, that we all need to tell our birth story. Absolutely. As a mom, as the father, as the partner, as the baby. But they may, like, you release the baby psoas and all of a sudden there's this big scream and everybody thinks they need to like stop it, but it's actually a massive release.
Yeah. And I always warn, when I work on babies, I always warn parents that that often is the response, because the baby is telling its story and releasing, and I always say to moms, how it is when you just need to have a good cry and you feel so much better, especially when you do the ugly cry, it's like that real gut wrenching and you just have that sense of release afterwards. Well, babies need to do that too. And we have a culture that wants to shush them and quiet them down. And, when I do cranial and they do that, I just put them up on my shoulder and I just hold them and just tell them that it's totally safe for them to tell me their story, that I want to hear their story. And it's amazing how quickly they calm down when they hear that. I don't think we kind of still think of babies like little blank slates. They're these wise, intuitive beings that come into the planet, and they even if they can't communicate the way we do, they understand the language that we use. So giving them permission to tell their story is, I think, so important. And for women who have C-sections, I think it's vital, if we can do it, to create a rebirthing situation where we put the baby on the belly and kind of reenact the birth process so that baby can come through and mama can get that experience of having babies coming into her arms so that they can bring that connection, because that's often there's like a wall that's between moms and babies that have been born by C-section. No matter how much moms try to break through that and use their logic, it was important, the baby needed to come that way, blah blah blah, they're still physically supposed to come out in a certain way, and we have that in our DNA as mothers, and we also and as babies both, so reenacting that and allowing babies to get born and then brought into mother's arms and brought to the chest and mama making that connection can be really big, do a big healing, an unwinding of all the trauma that they've carried. And so that's part of my practice when moms are open to it. And I just let babies kind of tell me when they're ready. And it's really interesting to see it, because oftentimes they'll just go upside down. When you start talking about when the mom is telling her birth story and when you start giving baby permission to come out a different way,
Yeah.
babies just go right into it, which is really sweet.
Well, and I think it's so important too to have that compassionate, deep listening for the baby and the mom. And, if it goes broader in the family system as well, that there's an acknowledgement of the experience and what happened for them. So,
and sometimes all you need is that recognition, to make it okay, that's like you feel seen, and there are women out there, lots of women out there who are really okay about the fact they had a cesarean, for example, but their DNA and their way inside parts are going to feel really different. So you can really honor that they're okay and still say, well, this is for the baby, and create. And it's really interesting to see when women are totally okay with, they had a prepared C-section because there's a cord issue. They know, the placenta's growing over the cervix, baby can't get through, something that they know that they have to have a cesarean, and they've done all this preparation, they've grieved it, and they seem to be okay. And then when we act out a birth, so to speak, for them, this deep grief that comes up for so many women, working on letting that go and be healed, and babies totally respond to that because they're, like you said, that interconnectedness is so strong, and we want to facilitate that as much as possible.
Yeah, and the birth plan, like the goal of, let's say, having a natural birth. I just remember with my own birth, my mom was sending me all these books on natural childbirth, and it started to kind of make me more nervous. I was like, sometimes too much information is too much.
Right. Right.
But I had every intention of having a natural birth, but also, things don't go as planned. And there's a grief, even if you don't end up with a C-section, there's a grief in having any kind of medical intervention, or if the breastfeeding doesn't work, all these things that come up in the birth process, a massive grief. And because our hormones are like all over the place, we have such it's almost comparative to perimenopause in some ways.
It is, and it's a big roller coaster. When my first child was born, I started off at home. I was planning a home birth, had a very long labor with her, and ended up transporting and taking medication when I got to the hospital. And it took me years and years and years to forgive myself. I really blamed every little problem that she had. She had all kinds of nursing issues because of the medication I took. They don't give this anymore. They used to give Demerol. My daughter's in her 40s. They used to give Demerol. Demerol impedes the nursing reflex, and my daughter was asleep for 14 hours after she was born. I mean, I basically held a baby that slept. So when she finally woke up, then she had all kinds of nursing issues, and I was sure, I blamed myself, because that's, again, part of our culture. We don't really have support. We think that it's got to look a certain way, and we can go to extremes in both directions. And I always say, as long as really healthy mom and healthy baby is ultimately the goal, no matter how it comes out. when I became a midwife and started attending births and saw babies that, you know, needed to come out cesarean and started to really understand the process, I started to work on learning how to forgive myself, you know, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that's a really common response with women when they don't have the birth, their expectations, you know, their fantasy birth. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't do women a service, I think, by sort of helping them facilitate that way. You know, I think that midwives hopefully are talking to them about what you want and then how to prepare for what you don't want, and to know that you get support no matter how that turns out, you know.
Well, I think that support piece too is really important. I mean, how to connect people with different resources in their community and even going abroad. I mean, you know, when I gave birth, the internet was around, but it was in 1999. I actually lived off the grid here in Taos. I didn't have access, and there wasn't as much like websites and information available. So that resource, that extra support really wasn't available the same way that we have access to today.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And really back then, I mean, my first website that I put out as a midwife came out in 1999, but I lived in a big city. I lived in Portland, you know, where it was, and my husband was a computer geek. So, you know, it was really easy for me to kind of, you know, I think I was one of the first midwives in the community that had a website, because I'm just sort of like that. I'm geeky in that way. So I could really tap into it. But I think for the rest of the country, especially the middle part of the country where that was just starting, it was like women didn't know how to do the research and how to ask for help. And, you know, we're very isolated. We don't get, you know, when we lived indigenously, no matter what culture we lived in,
Mm-hmm.
we had our aunties and our sisters and our mothers and our grandmothers and our best friend's mom. And, you know, and we had all these women around us who had given birth, who could hold space and support us, not only through the pregnancy, not only through the birth, but also in the postpartum. You know, that women were, you know, sort of encapsulated, you know, held, because they were considered sacred vessels to bringing new life into the world. And so taking care of the women and making sure that they were strong and healthy and that they had the support they needed was vital for the, so to speak, tribe to continue to grow and to flourish. And there are very few indigenous cultures where the women birth alone. There is one that's down in Central America. The mother mortality rate and the infant mortality rate is extraordinarily high because the women go and they birth by themselves. It's been shown that women really need, and what they really need is each other, you know. And then, you know, so, and that's where the midwife tradition comes from. There was always a midwife in the community, but midwives were few and far between, and they had big spaces between them when we lived, you know, in the 1400s and back. And so, you know, your sister had to know about herbs, just, you know, and had to have enough information that she could help herself and help you, or, you know, your girlfriend or whatever. There was always somebody in the community, in the, you know, that knew how to help. So, and that is something we don't have anymore and haven't had for a really long time. Women are really isolated. So they're going to their girlfriend to find out who their doctor was to have a baby, not knowing if their girlfriend had a good birth experience because she went in and got her epidural at 2 centimeters, right? They don't really know how to get that information. And I think now, as the internet has expanded the way it has, there's a little more, there's more options. But it also takes, because I find that in our culture that women don't want to know, that there's a part of them that's like, I'm just going to go to the doctor that, you know. So here in Taos, there's one OBGYN practice, that's it. So I'm just going to go to that practice, and I'm going to just work with whoever's there and have whoever's on call. And they don't want to do the research to find out. And sometimes it takes a bad birth experience for that to change.
Right.
It is for a lot of women. Even Ina May Gaskin had a really horrific first birth, and it was life-changing for her
Well,
and
it
brought
gets,
her.
yeah, it gets us interested in the work, right? Because I mean,
Exactly.
it's like the wounded healer. If we don't have a positive necessarily first birth, then of course we're going to explore how we can heal and then help other women
Yeah.
to have.
I'm convinced that if I'd had my daughter at home without any hiccups, I'd had a normal, even if I had a long but normal labor at home, I'd have just gone on about my life. I'm sure that it was the birth experience of going into the hospital and having all that change that made me kind of go, okay, wait a minute. What went wrong here? What can I do differently? How can I help? How can I, be of service in the world, So.
I, so when you were talking about herbology and the use of herbs, and I think you use homeopathy too, right? At the
I
birth.
use everything. I use essential oils too, but I use a lot of herbs for women in labor, and I do use homeopathy. Homeopathy to there's kind of two groups of people that there are people that kind of look at a couple of the symptoms and try to find the right remedy, which is pretty classic in the midwifery community because they don't really have deep understanding of homeopathy. And then there's people who, like me, who have been training as a homeopath. I've been doing it since my late 20s, and really kind of understand, um, like how do you get a remedy that's going to look at the overall picture. So sometimes at births, I found that there wasn't the time that I needed. Sometimes my apprentices would be in my books and trying to figure out what the right remedy is. I've seen it gone bad. I've seen people using the wrong remedy and seen there being a reaction to it. So when I don't know, when I'm not sure, I always go back to herbs because herbs are very clear in their, this is what you need for this. If you're having this kind of a bleed, you use this herb. If you're having another kind of bleed, you use a different herb. So I think I really like using herbs mostly in labor. When I was in my own practice, I also often did a constitutional remedy for a client if they were interested, and I would just have a separate visit with them where we would go over their whole kind of body system and some of their history, talk about their dreams and all those things, and then that would be their remedy that they would use through the pregnancy, and then if needed, it would be used in labor, so, and postpartum.
That's great. Well, I mean, I love herbs, so I think herbs are really powerful. I mean,
Yeah, me
my
too.
tendency, I've done some homeopathy training too as part of my integrative medicine doctorate, but my tendency is to always prefer the herbs. They speak to me, the plant medicine speaks to me more, for whatever reason. I don't know why, but that's
Well, and
interesting.
I've been studying herbs since I was really young. My mother's best friend got cancer when I was a kid, and she did an alternative treatment to heal herself, which she did. And they had given her a 3-month, life sentence. And when she came back from her treatment, she came in and cleaned out my mother's kitchen and started talking about whole foods. And we had a pretty good diet, but it changed dramatically when this woman happened. And my mother somehow or another took to herbal medicine, and I just went right along with her. So I've been studying herbs since I was 7, and I have a love affair with them. It's like one of my favorite herbal books talks about herbs and personalities and their natures and their energetics, and and I love that they're that about plant medicine. And that's not true in homeopathy or essential oils. It's very linear, it's very masculine, for lack of a better word, and I think herbs are very feminine in lots of ways. So
I think that's important because I think, well, and that's one of the parts that I wanted to say about midwifery is such a indigenous, ancient, wild, feminine art. And of course they were ostracized for that, burned at the stake, so to speak. And I think it's important that this is part of the reclamation is, if we're going to help heal the epigenetics, if you will, cross-generationally, we want to heal the babies that we're birthing, and we need to have that support of that wisdom circle of women around us so that we can heal, because we can't do it by ourselves. And that's how I grew up, right? You pull yourself up by the bootstraps, good old military brat style, and you got to take care of everything yourself. But honestly, healing, we need the co-regulation, our nervous system, we need each other. We just can't do it on our own.
Well, and it's one of the ways to break that, those family patterns, you know, the patterns of abuse, emotional abuse, all kinds of abuse, you know, just use that word in general, is by being conscious and aware and having that gathering of your sisters, you know, or people around you that can support you, so that you can change the patterns, you know, that you can make a difference. And even if you don't remove all the patterns, you make a dent in it. And so you hope that your children then will make the next dent, you know, that we continue to break those patterns. Yeah.
I think that's really, really important. I know that, you know, I've been reading a book on the history of the Highlanders lately. And because, you know, I rode my mountain bike last May, about a year ago, across the Highlands, which was crazy. I mean, it was the hardest ride I've ever done. And we were out in the wild, my partner and I, and it was hard. It was the hardest ride I've ever done. But we made it coast to coast, right? We crossed Scotland. But it was like a reclamation for me. I was like gathering this like natural strength, if you will, from the rivers, from the water, from the trees, from the moss, like gathering this energy and this resource. And I was like, wow, to be a Highlander, to be Scottish, you have to be tough.
Yeah.
You have to be like you. And, you know, the Scottish women got portrayed, or just the Highlanders, as savage and wild, but they weren't. They were just Gaelic. They were Irish, you know, and they were.
Well, they were the indigenous people. They were the indigenous people of Europe. I mean, part of it. There's, you know, I mean, we all come from an indigenous background. It's some, you know, and it's just the Europeans. It's just further. The colonization happened much sooner than it happened in the United States.
Yeah.
You know, when I was in some of my readings, I remember just silly, but I remember the first time that I read Outlander, and I was like, oh my God, the British did exactly to the Scots what they did here in the United States.
Exactly.
You know, it was like the mirror was so unbelievable, you know, and you know, the Roman Catholic Church, how it went after the Celts, and what it did for its gods and goddesses, and how it manipulated the sacred wells and all those things, you know, that all happened there. And I think we don't really understand that we have DNA, like deep grief over the fact that we lost our traditional values and our traditional ways.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and I think that's part of the healing, is we reclaim that and are right, you know, to practice these different types of healing arts. And to me, the craniosacral work fits perfectly, and the midwifery and herbology and all these arts. And you know, I'm also a structural body worker. These all are about finding that inner wisdom and reawakening it, and not getting and thriving and moving forward from trauma, and not getting stuck in a trauma story so much, having like compassionate listening around the trauma, but really moving forward in a graceful way, if we can, in just also reclaiming, because women are different. It's not the hero story of Campbell. Women climb into caves. We, you know, shed snake skins, if you will, and seal skins, and we're just really different in how we change. Like, we literally get rid of, like, the Selkie story, right? You lose your skin, but you literally have to take on a brand new identity when you transform. And motherhood is that. It has that transformation that's so powerful, but we don't have ritual, right?
Right.
You know, so much.
Well, and the whole thing is, you know, in most indigenous cultures, women were really honored during their moon time, because they had their own biological ritual, and that men had to create their own to almost emulate, you know, the shedding of blood and that kind of thing. And so we really literally shed until we hit menopause. And from, you know, so from when we hit puberty, those mother years, so to speak, until, you know, our fertile years, we're shedding that lining, which is a rebuilding, you know, it's letting go, it's a release. And that is, but because again, we live in this culture where there's so much shame attached to it. You know, it's something to put, you know, don't tell anybody, we're gonna stick something up there, we're gonna, you know, there's a lot of years that women were considered that they couldn't do as much as men when they were bleeding, and now we kind of have overcompensated that we can do anything when we're bleeding, you know. And that time is our cave woman time, it's our red tent, it's our time to go inward and to shed and to release. And the fact that we have so much shame, you know, that there are some of the birth controls that are out there are about women not having more than 1 or 2 cycles a year. Just,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, no, we need to do that. We need,
Right.
it's part of our health, but it's also part of our own personal ceremony that we have. You know, for me, I used to have the most horrendous menstrual cramps, like knock me on, you know, I was in bed with hot water bottles, you know, just trying to breathe through it. And then I had a child and a lot of that changed, but it still was pretty bad. And what I found that changed for me was when I started doing ceremony every month. And that can be different for every woman, but for me that meant cloth pads and soaking my pads in water and then putting the water in the earth, which is really traditional for a lot of cultures, and being really inward made my rejuvenation and my health so much better. And my menstrual cramps went away.
That's great. Well, and you know, we forget that you know, the goddess energy is lunar, right? So it's more with the moon cycle. And if you're when I was in Seattle, there were so many lights on in the city, you get a disconnect from where your cycle is necessarily. And now in Taos, I mean, the cosmos are so bright here. I mean, that pink moon in Libra this last week was crazy huge. I mean, it's like you couldn't ignore it. It was so big in Taos. I mean, I felt like it took up half the sky.
You
You know,
kind of did.
energy.
It
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely not having street lights. It's one of the, when I lived in the city, I always had to have those darkening curtains,
Yeah.
you know, because, you know, if I didn't, I couldn't sleep, you know. So it's a nice thing about, and when the moon is full, I have a hard time sleeping because it's so bright. It just goes right through the windows, you know.
And I remember there was a book I read in the early 90s. A girlfriend recommended it to me at that time. It was called Red Moon, White Moon. I think it was written by a nurse midwife out of Portland, in fact, at that time. It's what I'm remembering. I don't remember the author's name, but they really talked, she really talked about how to track your cycle, but and have a diary around it, but also how there's a different energy if you have your moon with the full moon is a red moon, and if you ovulate with the full moon, you're a white moon. And the energy with that, like people who are more red moon, which was me, have a tendency to go more into the shadow aspects and the dark. So it's a whole different experience of moon compared to like a real kind of like, I want to say airy fairy light. When you ovulate with the full moon, you're the maiden, you know, you're just like, you know, bright and happy. But the red moon women, they really walk a different path.
Are you still on that cycle?
I am. Yeah, I'm in perimenopause. I thought I was like, I'm hot to be in menopause is what I'm joking now. I had 3 months where I didn't cycle. And then I actually had a cycle with the new moon, and I just had it with that big pink moon. So 2 weeks apart. So I just had two, and they were, yeah, powerful and totally different. But I mean, I'm moving towards the end of the cycling, I think. Yeah, I'm at 52, but you know, there's still some work to be done there, obviously, in shedding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, just a reminder that menopause means holding your wise blood inside.
Mm.
Holding your wisdom inward, so part of being, postmenopausal or being a crone is that, that you're the wisdom keeper, and that you no longer need to shed your blood to pass that wisdom, to work with that wisdom, so I I think I was probably one of the few people that did this, but I really grieved when I stopped cycling. It was hard for me. I was like, I love that ritual that my body commanded, take it, pay attention, you're bleeding, right? And you have to, when you're postmenopausal, you have to find a way to create those rhythms without, just make it a part of your life instead of depending on your body to tell you that it's time.
So just to keep us within bounds, I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit, we're talking about a lot of different things, but this is all women's stuff, right? What kind of support or resource would you offer when women lose their child? They have a stillborn, or it happens in emergency C-section and they lose the baby. The grief, what I'm seeing is some of the women I work with are I'm trying to say, feel like it's their fault. Like, is there something they could have done? There's some real deep shame, and also the loss, really working with them in the 4th trimester, even though they've lost their baby, that they're still going through a 4th trimester process. That's really important. So I don't know.
Their milk comes in, even if they're binding their breasts and drinking herbs, we might lessen it, but their milk is coming in, their hormonal fluctuations are there. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is true about abortions too. I know that's a touchy subject for a lot of women, but for a lot of people, but women sometimes choose to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason, and that's not my place to be in judgment about that. And they may really grieve the loss of that baby. They may feel like they have no other choice but to terminate that pregnancy, and that's even treated more like, well, you chose that, so it's even more looked down at. Miscarriage is often looked as like not such a big deal. Well, you can get pregnant again, must have been something wrong with the fetus, whatever. The studies have shown that when women find out they're pregnant, that they envision a full-grown baby in arms. And it doesn't matter when they let go or how they let go. It is still a grief process when that comes to an end. So whether they have a miscarriage at 6 weeks, they terminate at 6 weeks, they lose a baby at 3 months, they have a fetal loss at 20, 25 weeks, there's, or stillbirth, that fantasy has been with them through the whole pregnancy of this baby in arms, no matter how long it lasts. And that grief process is the same as any kind of loss. And that needs to be treated, and women need to have permission to be depressed, to cry, to feel all the things that they feel, and get the support and love that they need around that. Instead, there's a need in our culture to push that kind of stuff away. Like you've agreed, and I've seen this with women who have had stillbirths that, a year later, they're still really struggling. And the people around them are saying, kind of get over it. And I always love to say that grief lasts as long as grief lasts. And none of us know how long that's going to be. And it doesn't matter if it takes her 5 years or 5 days to get over it. Mm-hmm. That's her process. And I think that women who lose a child, especially women who lose, well, at any point, you never quite ever get over it. You always have the feeling like they should have outlived you. So when you have a baby that comes into your arms, it's not here on the planet, their body's here, but their spirit and their soul is not. There is that sense of why me? Why am I here when they're not? Those kinds of things. And so we just do what the normal support that we do around grief, and also support the hormonal changes, because the hormones are just wicked crazy for women who have had a loss at birth, because they're in that fourth trimester, their hormones are all over the place, but they don't have any release, because normally they put a baby on the breast and they get this release, they get the prolactin, they get this, oxytocin high, but they don't get any of that. And even if and sometimes they're pumping, sometimes they're not, but then it's like, well, what are they going to do with this milk that they have for this baby that's not here? So this is a big challenge. And I think it's really important that women are not isolated, and that most of us want to go into our cave when that kind of thing happens, but we really need our sisters, our support people during that time, and giving them permission to grieve as long as they need to grieve, that there's no time limit.
Right. And maybe just a word of wisdom for family members to be more supportive and not be in judgment of the experience that the mom is going through, and that they are a mother.
Yeah.
Even when they've lost their baby, they are a mother. That honor that.
Your body alters when you get pregnant. The first time that you get pregnant, there's biological changes. The cervix completely changes. Even if you miscarry at 6 weeks, you can look at a woman's cervix and know if she's been pregnant or not. So these biological changes, and to say that she's not a mother when she doesn't have a living child here is so disrespectful to her, because she's not only brought this being in, but then she had to let it go. She did bigger work in some ways. And I think the best thing that you can do for someone is just be there and just do that, deep listening. There isn't any need to say maybe you're sorry, but there's no reason to say, you don't have to fix it. And I think a lot of people want to fix things. They want to say, so that's why the first time I had a miscarriage, I remember my doctor actually at the time, who was someone who'd been my gynecologist for years, and I loved him. And he said, "Oh, honey, you'll get pregnant again." I wanted to just slap him, because that totally negates this pregnancy, this baby, this process, this experience when you kind of go forward. And so giving women permission to stay in the present, and knowing that it's going to take as long as it's going to take, and that they have the love and support that they need. They have a place that they can cry and fall apart or be angry.
Yeah. And have different ways to express those emotions in a safe place, and work with somebody like you or me, or a therapist, different ways that people can really hold space.
And I think that ceremony and ritual is really important, like doing doing a funeral, so to speak, or a memorial, or some kind of. I had a woman friend who had a pretty horrific second pregnancy, and ended up with this crazy cesarean. And I met her years after that had all happened, and she had what's called an inverted T. So it's like the line that goes across and then up. So it's a pretty, and she had really serious blood pressure issues. And she got pregnant years later, wasn't sure what she was going to do. And right away in first trimester, her blood pressure started to skyrocket. And her OB said, "I don't know if you keep this pregnancy, if you will come out of it alive." And she chose to terminate, and she did the most amazing thing. That the OB did the abortion, but kept the products and put it in the saline in a container. And then she and her partner went to the ocean and did a ceremony and released that being, and she said, "I've never regretted it. I always felt like I had closure because I got to do a ceremony." And for women who have miscarry or even have abortions, there's no ceremony. There's no goodbye. And I think that helps the healing process to feel like you got to say goodbye. You got to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a miscarriage before I had my first daughter. And I fortunately had trained a lot with ceremony between Lakota tradition and Celtic traditions, and I actually did do a ceremony, and I was able to bury it was a 6 weeks fetus, or
Yeah.
so, but I took it to my favorite old growth forest in the Northwest and did a whole ceremony and buried it, gave it back to Mother Earth, and
Yep.
it felt really good to just like
Yeah.
gift and honor the spirit and just like release it back up, and just know that there's an anchor somewhere on the earth.
And that's why we do ceremony. It's why, a ritual, it's part of the purpose for it, is to anchor us, to give us purpose, to also there to be an end in sight. My first miscarriage, I had been on bed rest for 10 weeks. And the minute I stood up, I mean, it was a pregnancy that wasn't going to stay no matter what, but the minute I stood up, I basically miscarried. And I walked around in a state of shock for a long time because I had tried so hard to hold on to that little person. And when I got around the due date, my ex-husband and I we lived on the coast at the time, and we had taken the parts, and I had actually frozen it because I knew we were going to do ceremony at some point. And we went to the ocean. He bought this little, intuitively I always thought it was a boy, so he bought this little train set, and him and I went to the beach and did this amazing ceremony together, and we both broke down and cried and had this big, grieved, and my daughter was with us because she was old enough and she was heartbroken. And when that was over, I felt like this cloud just came up off of me, because there's closure. There was this sense of being done, and it was, and that, I could have done it earlier, but I did it when it felt right. And so I think that's the other thing is anytime there's a loss, and usually when a baby dies, when there's like a stillbirth, there's usually a funeral of some kind for that baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps because there is a sense of closure. But for women who miscarry, there isn't usually that. There's just a sense of it just went away,
Yeah. Well, and we're not it's ironic, but it just, what we're talking about this right now, but we don't know that we can ask for, like when we're working with our physician, or like even when I gave birth to my daughter, I didn't know I could ask to keep the placenta. They didn't even offer.
No, of course
They
not.
they took her placenta, and I didn't even know that.
And they burned it.
But that was my daughter's placenta.
Yeah.
That was hers, and we weren't given the option to keep it, like, because I know you do placenta encapsulation too, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, I feel so naive, and I wasn't young when I gave birth. I was 32, I think. But I didn't know.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, so I think that's the big piece, is that, we can tell women to educate themselves, but if you don't know, where do you start, and how do you, and that's why I think having that community, that sisterhood, that group of wise women around you, that can make suggestions, that can offer ideas that you may never have thought of. So I think that's really well stated, that, there's so much to know. When you find out that you're pregnant, there's so much that you need to learn. And then when you get done, it's like, then you have to learn about being pregnant, and then you have to learn about being in labor, and then you have to learn about raising a baby. And that's just the beginning, really. And so, it's like, where do you really start? And which is the right book, which is the, it's like, well, I know it's popular. I know it's on the New York Times bestselling list, but is that actually a good book? The worst book on the planet to me is What to Expect When You're Expecting. Not only does it not give any information, but it tells you to go to your doctor for everything. That's their answer to everything. It's just a horrendous piece of childbirth information. And it's the most popular childbirth book out there still to this day.
Mhm.
Like, and there's lots of great books out there for people who still want, who want to have a hospital birth and want to, don't want to do anything. They want to do so to speak, what's become traditional. There's still incredible information out there, but you got to know where to look and how to do that. So,
well, and I think to resource professionals if you can, and even, I often what I see, well, we're in rural New Mexico, right? So a lot of times people don't have the money, but
right.
instead of giving people gifts like baby toys and crap, we should be buying them craniosacral therapy gift certificates with somebody like you. We should be, giving them access to resource of other humans. Like human support should be really the gift. And that's going to go a lot farther, I think, in because you can get used baby clothes. They grow so fast. They don't need that much, really.
My ideal or my fantasy about what a woman would be offered would be three prenatal visits and 3 postpartums. And, that's if there's no problems. It can take care of sciatica. It can deal with heartburn. There's so many things that it can take care of in the physical for women. But it's also, if the craniosacral therapist is someone like me who has childbirth background, it's also a safe place for women to talk about their fears and what's up for them. I would say half of what I do is helping women process and get ready to have a baby or process after their birth. And, so that's my ideal for the basic, is that they would get, a 6 package.
Right. So 3 sessions before birth and then 3 sessions after for support. And because you do outcalls, you come in the house, they don't have to leave. I mean, that's one thing I think people don't understand, is that we work with mamas and babies.
Yeah.
And treat mama and baby. We
Right.
treat both. You can't treat one without the other. They're not separate. They're a unity. They're a whole. And they're going into that 4th trimester, which people seem to think like, oh, somebody gave birth, boom, there's a baby, and it's over. It's like, no.
Oh, it's just begun.
Yeah.
And traditionally, in almost every culture in the world, women stay home for 40 days after they have a baby, which is exactly 12 weeks. 6 weeks. And so to get them to stay home, I don't want them to come out of the house and come and get on my table. I want them to stay home and let me take care of them. And I actually have this little folding pad that I bring with me to some clients' houses, so that I can work on, but I can work on beds. I can put women back together on a bed, just as easily as I can on a table. And I almost always bring a ball with me. So if I can get them on a flat surface and sit on a ball, I can work on mom,
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that when mamas and babies have to go out in the world. And I know women get stir crazy, but traditionally 6 weeks, because life was harder back then. You had to work really hard to make sure you had food on the table and wood on the fire and clothes on your back. So to take 6 weeks where you were traditionally really loved and nurtured, it takes 6 weeks to establish a good breastfeeding rhythm.
Mm.
So there's something magical about the 6 weeks, about just doing 6 weeks. So, if I'm coming in at, week 1 and then seeing them, every week, for 3 weeks, then I'm really helping them, get off to a good path. And they're, if this goes to other communities, there's lots of craniosacral therapists who have this kind of, we'll do this, so. It's best when they stay in their own home in the beginning. I have them come to my office when they're pregnant, because it's just easier to work on a pregnant woman on a table. And I don't carry a table. I'm too old to carry a table. But even the lightweight ones are challenging for me at this point in my life. But but once they've had the baby, I want to go to their home and take care of them. So I think that's the best.
Is there anything else you would You think we should add to this conversation? It seems like we're getting to a good closure because we're kind of ending
Yeah,
the fourth trimester.
I think we're um, pretty much there. I mean, I'm really grateful and feel really honored to do this work, and I feel so grateful for all the years of birthing babies and being, and including the babies who have left the planet. I've done a lot of stillbirths over the years, and it's intense and hard and incredibly powerful to witness a spirit coming in and leaving all at the same time. And so I think that women deserve that, to have that kind of love and support, however they're going to get it, from a doula or whatever, that they can get that kind of support so that they can, heal the way that they need to heal.
Well, and birth is really betwixt and between,
Yeah.
so even with a stillborns, a lot of times mom almost leaves too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Keeping one on the planet sometimes is a struggle.
Yes. Yeah, because they're in that state of grief and their spirit is really open. And yeah, I can imagine. My youngest child, when he was born, I was so between the worlds that if he had crossed over, I would have followed him. I'm sure of that.
Mhm.
And so that's not, and that's the why, you hope for the wise. This is why I think having support is so important, is that you have a wise woman that kind of knows how to keep an eye on you and keep you rooted and grounded, because you still need to be here for your other children or for the children that are to come, and for your family. So yeah,
Keeping that tether to the earth, knowing
keeping that
somebody
tether
who
to the earth. Yeah, that
yeah,
tether can get real thin sometimes, but yeah, that's part of our job, is to keep them tethered to the planet.
yeah. Awesome. This is so fun, Madrona. Thank you. We get to talk about some of our
I can
favorite.
talk about birth for hours.
No, well, we might have to do it again and focus on something else as it comes forward. But I think we covered like a whole bunch of amazing things and real about it. So I hope it's going to be helpful for some people who are looking to start to find some resource and know that craniosacral, knowing to reach to doulas, to midwives, to other practitioners who've trained in supporting the birth story process. There's a lot of, I want to say there's a lot of pre and perinatal psychologists that are out there too. So just knowing that there's a whole, I didn't know about all this stuff when I gave birth to my daughter, so that there are a lot of practitioners who have done advanced training who specifically work with pregnant mamas and the birth process and babies, and we all work together.
Absolutely. Thank you
Um,
so
Thank
much.
you. Yay. Okay, I'm
Yay.
gonna stop the recording.